Warning, the following video may contain sequences which some viewers may find disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
The case we will be going over today is pretty, let's just say, extreme. We will be going over the case of the first woman in Australia to ever get life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Can you take a guess as to what she did? Did she kill a man? Sure, but that alone wouldn't warrant such a sentence now, would it? So what else did she do? Well, how about this? Let's put some names and context to it. The woman was Katherine Mary Knight. The man she killed was John Charles Thomas Price. But what really put her in jail for life wasn't just the murder as stated earlier, it's what she did after. After killing John, she then skinned him, cooked him, and attempted to feed him to his own kids. Before we get into the crime itself, let's talk a bit about Katherine. Who is she? Well, she was part of a very dysfunctional family. Katherine's mother was a woman called Barbara Ruffin. Now, Barbara was originally from the town of Aberdeen in New South Wales, Australia. She moved to a town called Moree, though, after starting a relationship with a man called Ken Knight, who was a co-worker of her husband. Yes, you heard right. She started an affair with her husband, Jack Ruffin's co-worker. Katherine was the younger of twins born to Barbara and Ken. They were born in 1955. With a family like that, you can only imagine how her home life was. Ken happened to be an alcoholic. He openly used violence to rape Katherine's mother up to 10 times a day. Barbara would, for some reason, however, tell her daughters the intimate details of her sex life, how much she hated sex and men. Totally normal conversation for a mother and daughter, right? Am I right? Anyways, Katherine also claims to have been sexually abused by several family members, which was confirmed by other members of the family. As a result of all of this, Katherine experienced uncontrollable murderous rages whenever she got upset. Her schoolmates remember her as a bully. She had assaulted at least one student and had even gotten injured by a teacher who acted in self-defense. Despite all this, however, she was actually quite pleasant when not trying to rip someone's head off their body. She had often earned awards for good behavior in school, apparently, which sounds contradictory seeing that her classmates remember her as a bully. She left school at the age of 15, but wasn't able to read or write. She worked at a clothing factory at first, but later got a job at the local abattoir. Fun fact about Katherine, she used to hang knives over her bed.
Why?
Because it would always be handy if I needed them.
Her words, not mine.
All right, now that we know who she is, let's talk about what led up to her crime. David Kellett. This was her first husband. They met in 1973, and Katherine, I suppose, swept him off his feet with her domineering nature. It's said that she would even back him up in fights. A year after meeting, they got married in 1974. Things started to go downhill from the wedding night. She tried to strangle him. Yes, strangle him on their wedding night. Reason being because he only had sex 3 times before falling asleep. Talk about insatiable. The marriage continued to go downhill from there. It was really violent. There was even an occasion where Katherine, who was well into a period of pregnancy, had burnt all of David's clothes and shoes before whacking him in the back of the head with a frying pan. Reason being because he came home late from a darts competition. He had made the finals that time. David fled for his life and had to be treated for a badly fractured skull. She would have been charged, but she somehow got David to drop the charges. Shortly after the birth of their first child in 1976, David left her for another woman and moved to Queensland, Australia. For obvious reasons. A day later, she was seen pushing her new baby down the street in a stroller, but was aggressively tossing it around. She was admitted to St. Elmo's Hospital and was diagnosed with postnatal depression and had to spend weeks recovering. Once she did, she placed her 2-month-old daughter, who I forgot to mention earlier, name is Melissa, on a railway line with a train due to approach at any moment. She had then grabbed an axe and ran into town threatening to kill several people. Luckily, though, the baby was saved by a man who was foraging around the railway line. And Katherine was arrested and taken to the hospital, but she signed herself out the following day. I have no idea who gave the green light on that, but okay. I know this is more than enough to show how crazy this woman is, but there's more. A few days after that incident, Katherine slashed the face of a woman with one of her knives and demanded that she drive her to Queensland to find her runaway husband. The woman managed to escape when they stopped at a service station on the way there, but by the time the police arrived, Katherine had already taken a little boy hostage and was threatening him with a knife. Long story short, she was disarmed and then brought to a psychiatric hospital. When David heard of what happened, he left his girlfriend and went back to support Katherine. This is odd. Usually it's the woman who returns to her male abuser, but in this case, it's the opposite, but I digress. In 1980, she had another child with David, Natasha. And in 1984, she left David and moved into her parents' house, but then to a rented house in Musselbrook. He dodged a serious bullet, if you ask me. In 1986, she had met a miner called David Saunders, and he moved in with her a few months later, but he did still keep his old apartment, which would later prove to be one of the best decisions he's ever made. Katherine was still the same old Katherine, violent, and she would often get jealous over what Saunders decided to do when she wasn't around. And to top it off, she would throw him out often, only for her to later come crawling back to his old apartment, begging him to come back. In 1987, Saunders had got a dingo puppy, only 2 months old, which Katherine killed. Slit its throat right in front of him. She did so because she wanted to show him what would happen if he had ever cheated on her, and then she knocked him out with a frying pan. I do not know what would have possessed Saunders to stay with her, but he did, so much so that in 1988, they had a baby together, Katherine's third daughter, Sarah. Saunders wanted to do the right thing and be a good father for his child, so he put a deposit on a house which Katherine paid off in 1989. Life did not improve after that, however. Their relationship was turning out similar to how her relationship with her first husband was. And really, why wouldn't it? She had not changed. The final straw for Saunders was an argument in which she hit him in the face with an iron, then proceeded to stab him in the stomach with a pair of scissors. He moved back to his old apartment. And once he did, he learned that Katherine had already cut up all his clothes. Saunders went into hiding after that. Knight tried to find him, but no one was letting her know where he was. After many months, he returned to see his daughter, but to his surprise, Katherine, out of spite, had gone to the police and told them that she was afraid of him, that he was violent. And they had issued her with an apprehended violence order against him. If you don't know what that is, it's a court order that aims to protect a person by prohibiting another's behavior, usually issued for domestic abuse. Moving on, a year after those events, in 1990, Katherine became pregnant again by a former co-worker called John Chillingworth and gave birth to her first boy, Eric. They stayed together for 3 years until she left him for someone she was having an affair with, and that person was none other than John Price. I know that was a lot, but now it's time to discuss her crime. Murdering John Price. John was the father of 3 when Katherine had an affair with him. He was married before, but that marriage has ended in 1988 when Katherine was still with David Saunders. Price was well aware of Katherine's violent reputation and tendencies, but I suppose he thought he could handle it. She moved in with him in 1995. Price's kids liked her. He was making a lot of money in the mines, and though there were violent arguments, things were going well in his eyes. Up until 1998. In 1998, they had a big argument because Price refused to marry her. He was content with how things were. Katherine was not like that, and she did not like that he wasn't bending on this. So, in retaliation, she video recorded some old things Price had stolen from his job. In hindsight, it was just things he scavenged from the company's rubbish, but it was enough to get him fired from a job he had for nearly 20 years. Price had kicked her out, and she had returned to her own home. A couple months after, just like her former men, Price gave her another chance and had rekindled their relationship. I really want to know what this woman had that these men just could not leave alone. Anyways, in February 2000, Katherine, through yet another argument, ended up stabbing Price in the chest. He had had enough and kicked her out for good, going as far as setting up a restraining order to keep her away from both him and his kids. He got that restraining order on February 29th, and ironically, that very afternoon, he had told his co-workers that if he didn't come to work the next day, he's dead, and Katherine did it. They told him if that's the case, then don't go home, but Price feared Katherine would have killed his kids.
So he left.
When he got home, he learned that Katherine wasn't there. However, she had sent his kids away for a sleepover at a friend's house. Katherine arrived at his house after 11 p.m. She woke him, and they had sex before he fell asleep for the last time. Katherine had hidden a knife for this exact moment and stabbed him while he slept. He awoke and tried to escape the house as Katherine chased him. He even made it outside, but Katherine dragged the by then weak man back inside. Ultimately, he bled out. Katherine had then withdrew $1,000 from Price's bank account for some reason, then returned and had skinned him, decapitated him, and cooked parts of his body with potatoes, pumpkin, squash, gravy, zucchini. Honestly, this lady was making a Thanksgiving dinner with the man's body. She had set the food at the table with notes of both Price's kids' names on them in front of the plates. She intended to feed him to his own kids. His head was still in the pot when they found him. Speaking of, they found him the following morning. Of course, Price did not arrive at work, which got people worried. His neighbor knocked on his bedroom window and there was no response. They noticed blood, however, and called the police. The police broke in through the back door, and they found Price's body, as well as an unconscious Katherine. The autopsy revealed she had stabbed him at least 37 times. The case isn't over yet. Now comes the trial. I will keep this brief, however. Several people came forward at the murder trial, from ex-lovers to family members, to explain exactly what Katherine was capable of, even bringing up the puppy incident mentioned previously. They painted her as a cruel woman, one who would harm anyone who had the unfortunate experience of being involved with her. Yet, many stated that just looking at her, she didn't seem like it. She looked like she could be anyone's mother. Katherine started her trial pleading not guilty, but she had changed it suddenly. It puzzled her attorneys. They even ordered a psychiatric assessment on her, just to make sure she understood exactly what pleading guilty meant. And she, I suppose, did know. It was revealed also that she suffered with borderline personality disorder, but she was still in total control of her actions the day she killed Price. It wasn't an impulse killing, it was thought out. She prepared for it. Even having sex with him was just to lower his guard. She hid a knife for that exact moment. It wasn't borderline doing the killing. That was all her. Though pleading guilty, she still did not accept responsibility for her actions. At the sentencing hearing, Katherine's lawyers requested that she be excused so she could avoid hearing some of the facts. That was denied. When a doctor came to the stand and started to describe the skinning and decapitation of Price, Katherine became hysterical and had to be sedated. Ultimately, she was given the harshest sentence possible in Australian law and was the first woman in Australia's history to ever receive such a punishment. Her file was quite literally marked, never to be released. This case was shocking to say the least. Heinous, wicked. It is hard to believe someone
Could do something like that.
But alas, Katherine Mary Knight did do it. Really though, I'm sure no one expected her to do something as extreme as that, but I think logically speaking, sooner or later she would have done something to someone. I mean, what led up to this? Her past relationships, her violent tendencies, constant arguments, stabbing 2 of her partners, hitting them in the face with frying pans, irons, fracturing an ex-husband's skull, killing a puppy. I mean, the list just goes on, and I did not even mention everything that is reported on this woman. When you really think about it, this was inevitable. Now, her having borderline personality disorder does explain the violent outbursts. Though it's not guaranteed, there is an increased risk for someone suffering with borderline personality disorder to be more violent. They're emotionally unstable, and that can translate to many different responses, violence being one of them. I'm not saying people suffering with that mental illness are going to be like Katherine, obviously, but it does seem like in her case, her violent outbursts were so frequent because of her BPD. That being said, she still was a psychopath, and that was not borderline's fault. Perhaps her upbringing had a huge part to play in why her psyche was so screwed up, but she was totally aware of everything she did the day she killed Price. She was aware of what she was doing when she put out a court order on her ex-husband, when she slashed a woman's face to get her to follow her ex who ran away from her, when she put her baby on a train track. None of that was her borderline, that was all her. I think the main lesson we can all draw from this is, please, if you see a red flag, do not ignore it. It may never end this violently, but it for sure will save you a lot of heartache. Katherine is gone for good, however, never to be released, and I think we can all be glad that her reign of terror is over.